Hi guys, Romans here, and in this video I'm gonna tell you about how I wrote the music for Golden Times. Golden Times is like a synth-based experimental art pop electronic song that has 3 different parts and almost 7.5 minutes. Definitely not what I originally intended with the track, so that's what I'm gonna talk about for the most part. I started writing this track at the end of 2013, and there was a specific event that kind of made me want to write a song about nostalgia. I'm gonna talk about it more in the next video, how I wrote the lyric. I think in like December 2013 I had the first version of the track. Now I mean part 1 of Golden Times, Nostalgia, that's what I'm talking about. And the main theme came from, I guess, a theme I had before, which was basically just arpeggios in A minor. And from that I created the main theme. I had the verses and I had the first chorus. The main theme is almost the same as when I wrote it, but there was this ending where I had basically like this Easter egg. That's the melody from Terminator, which is arguably one of the best main themes ever. And I wanted to include this sort of an Easter egg into the main theme because Terminator 2 is a very strangely nostalgic movie for me. But in today's world where you can get sued for literally anything, I just didn't think it was a good idea. So I didn't have the ending of the theme, and that's when I came up with, which I think is more beautiful and still maintains that nostalgia factor. Verses, for the most part, are how I wrote them in 2013. And then in 2021, when I started revisiting this track and all of the ideas and different sections I had for it, I realized that there were 6 possible choruses for this song. Now, honestly, this is a good problem to have when you have too many sections to choose from, too many different choruses to choose from. That's always a good problem. So the first chorus was written in 2013, and I wrote the second chorus shortly after in 2014. And both of these choruses are a little bit similar in their vibe. They're pretty good, and I want to use them sometime in the future, but they're very, very melodramatic, very cinematic, very melancholic. And I just didn't really want a chorus like that in a song like this. I also wrote the third chorus in 2014, which was basically just playing the main theme and singing over it. And then we go all the way to 2019 when I wrote another 2 choruses. The fourth one, which basically had a somewhat similar chord progression to the verses. And this was used for part 2, which I'm gonna talk about in a minute. And the fifth chorus was actually the final one, where it's also kind of like the main theme, but it's like the variation of it.
Wondering if there are golden times ahead.
But there was one more chorus from 2020, the 6th one. And I had this recording on my phone, and when I listened to it, I couldn't really remember the melody, but I was like, oh my god, this is so beautiful. The melody really moved me, almost to tears. This is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard.
Break it, falling down. I'll take this on this ground. Break it, falling down, and say, I won't break it, fall. I will believe.
And actually, I really wanted this melody to be the main chorus. But the problem was the main theme, the verses, and all 5 of the choruses were in A minor, whereas this section was actually in C major. And all of you musicians out there, you may say, yeah, but both of these scales basically have the same notes. Still, it would be kind of a jump. Let me demonstrate. Enjoying every second like it would never end. I will believe in what comes next. And imagine the ending of it. Great things to arrive. Another one of those trips down memory lane. So I knew that this section, as cool and as beautiful as it was, just simply couldn't be the chorus. You know, and I could have just put it aside and say, okay, whenever I have a pop song and I'm in need of a beautiful chorus, I can come back to this section and reuse it. But I really felt very, very strong about it and I wanted to use it in this track. So this is when the idea for multiple parts came to my mind. And I was like, okay, how about using that 5th chorus in part 1, and this would be like the next part. But I also realized that going from A minor to C major, you kind of have to have some build up so that it actually makes sense and it feels like a climax. So this is actually what part 2 is used for, which is for the most part a bass solo. And the chord progression in part 2, so the chord progression for the bass solo is actually the 4th chorus that I mentioned before. When you have more sections and more ideas and more parts for a certain song than just verse, bridge, chorus, verse, bridge, chorus, and you have quite a few other sections, what you can do is to actually be a bit more experimental, be a bit more adventurous, and try to write a longer song that has different sections. How to transform a mistake into a musical moment. Now, when I write music, be that on a piano or on a guitar, usually when I come up with something that's really cool, especially singing-wise, like a singing melody, I try to record it as soon as I can and I try to capture the melody, what I like about it, and also some kind of a performance that I can then try to imitate. In this process, we really sometimes talk about seconds. And when I was writing that chorus in part 1 of Golden Times, I actually made a mistake, which is pretty common because if you are writing something and you are just writing it, you're making it on the go, or you're kind of trying to remember the melody you had come up with like 10 seconds ago, obviously you're gonna do mistakes. And I don't really care about it. I listened to it, I know how I meant it. But with Golden Times, I actually made a mistake that when I was revisiting all these different sections for Golden Times and I was listening to this chorus, I thought to myself, that's actually a pretty cool thing. Because what happened was that as you played, basically the whole chorus is in 4/4 time signature. Wondering if there are golden times. So everything is on 4. But as I was writing the second line, I made a mistake. Na 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 na. So basically what I did there, that was 4/4. So I added one note, and basically in that one bar, twice in the chorus, we go from 4/4 to 5/4.
Got to bed to be loved. They will make me feel as those before.
Obviously, it was just a mistake, but when I listened to the original tape, I was like, that's actually pretty cool. I think I could include it into the track and it would make for a nice moment. It really complicates things, especially when you play the song live. I remember when the drummer, William, recorded the track, he was like, well, the whole track is on 4/4, it shouldn't be any problem, right? And I was like, well, there's one 5/4, you know, in the chorus, and he was like, yeah, the 5/4. Even when we played it live, Jacob, our current drummer, was like, oh, why did you have to put it there? So it makes the song much more difficult to play because you have to really memorize where that 5/4 happens and where it occurs. But, you know, I don't think you will really notice that anything like that is there when you listen to the track, but musicians may be like, wow, this is a cool moment. Like they put this little twist here, makes things more interesting. So sometimes when you make mistakes, it may actually manifest itself into a section that is much cooler with that added mistake or added note or time signature change, or call it whatever you want. So this is how you can take a mistake and transform it into something really musical that if it wasn't for that mistake, you wouldn't really do otherwise. How to make long verses interesting. In Golden Times Part 1 Nostalgia, which is like the longest part of the 3, the song structure is theme, verse, chorus, theme, chorus. We hear verses twice and both times it's 64 seconds. So a little bit over a minute of just this. Even though I'm singing all the time and there are different words coming in, over a minute of this is pretty boring if the piano was just playing this chord progression. You actually hear there like electronic drums, you hear a piano, you hear synths.
The way it makes me feel is so hard to explain.
But halfway through, I introduced the arpeggios, which I actually talk about in the Sounds Behind Golden Times, so you can check that video out.
Sometimes I just wish that I could feel that void.
And then when we hear the verse again after the first chorus, we still hear arpeggios halfway through because I think that they're sonically just so interesting that they can be repeated twice and it's cool. But in that first half, I'm using all these like random notes.
Another one of those trips down memory lane. Warming my...
And this is the advantage of C major or A minor, that you can just play any white keys and you're gonna be good. And I started introducing these notes so that the second time around, when there are no arpeggios, but the chord progression is still the same thing, we hear a new moment, new element introduced. Whenever you have a very long section where you have one chord progression being repeated all over again, and this is something what I discussed a lot in how I wrote the music for My Biggest Foe, it's all about the sounds. Just try to introduce different sounds, different arrangements, and you're gonna be good, and no one's gonna be like, ah, that's going on for too long. No, because you are introducing new things as you go, and that's what's gonna make the song really interesting.